So, as we're exploring what is Hebrew and who is Hebrew, I ask the question, as far as the language or the language of Hebrew, many people do not know that the Hebrew language is the only ancient language to become resurrected and put back into use in modern times. That's simply amazing. Meanwhile, the language as was spoken was completely wiped out. There are no recordings. It was wiped out before there were recording devices. And now a form of a language believed to be modern Hebrew has been resurrected. But I ask you, how do we know what Hebrew sounded like? And I ask you, is there anyone in the world, and I don't believe there is, that could go back to their ancestors 200 years ago and speak to them in your native tongue and allow them to speak in their native tongue? Virtually the way the world develops, languages evolve, and civilization takes place, there's probably a small handful of people on earth that could go back to their ancestors 200 years ago and communicate accurately with them, accurately and openly, using the same language, because the same language does not exist. Meanwhile, we have resurrected a language, and we believe it has some connection to ancient Hebrew, and it may or may not. There's a lot of pride involved with the idea that it is, but there may not be a lot of fact or truth. So I ask you, who in the Bible spoke Hebrew? And the question is, did Abraham of the Bible speak Hebrew? Probably half the time when I ask that question, people say yes. Meanwhile, Abraham was the first one, according to conventional definitions. Who did he speak that language to? Did he make a language up to talk to himself? I don't think so. So the Hebrew language, as it's known, probably did not exist at the time of Abraham. Or, if it did, it was called another language, Sumerian, of some form. Meanwhile, as we follow that thought process through, we go, Abraham begot Ishmael and Isaac. Did they speak Hebrew? And at that point, there were three of them. They traveled internationally. They traveled throughout the region of the Chaldean region, Babylonian regions and all. It wasn't Babylonia yet, but did they create a language to speak amongst themselves? Probably not. There was not that many of them. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, who became Israel, defected from his town and went where he met Rachel, stayed with the Midianites. Did he speak Hebrew? Probably not. There was no language of Hebrew at the time of Jacob, and there was no one to use it with. He actually spoke the language of the Midianites when he arrived there because he spoke to his father-in-law and to the girl at the well. Wow. Why haven't we challenged this? Because it's actually critical to lining up biblical history. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, which is Israel. Jacob has 12 sons. The 11th son is Joseph, who is thrown in a pit at 17 years old, becomes prime minister of Egypt. I submit to you, Joseph was Egyptian. The Bible says he lived in Egypt until he was 110 years old. He lived for 97 years in Egypt. He spoke Egyptian. So where does the Hebrew enter in? And I submit to you that by the fourth generation from Abraham, there still was not a Hebrew language. History verifies this, but Bible teachers have not shared it with you because we've edified a language that was not developed for thousands of years later. And we'll explain that, take you through it step by step. We read in the Bible that Joseph was not allowed to associate. He was second to Pharaoh, and he was not allowed to associate with his brothers. He married an Egyptian woman. The Bible clearly tells us he married an Egyptian woman, and he was not socializing with his brothers for their entire duration there. Joseph and his wife, who did not associate with the Bedouins, the sheep herders, had children. Now, the sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, I know they're tribes of Joseph. They're part of the tribes. But Ephraim and Manasseh, the sons of Joseph, were Egyptian. They spoke Egyptian and lived in an Egyptian household and Egyptian lifestyle. The funny thing is, commentaries don't address this, and we have lost part of history, because if your father was the most powerful man on earth, second only to Pharaoh, then what role would his sons bear in the kingdom? They're lost in the obscurity of the text because that part of the text was recorded in Egyptian. The ancient Egyptian texts reveal this story, but we have to identify the fact that written Hebrew did not exist yet, and the story was recorded in Egyptian because they're Egyptian people. That's going to offend some people, but understand that if you were of Jewish descent, born in New York City, you would be an American. Still Jewish by ethnicity. You could actually be Catholic by religiosity. You would be a New Yorker by way of birth and an American because of a birthright. But you're still of Jewish descent. And we fail to look at subcultures in the Bible. And the Hebrew people were a subculture of Egypt. And to people outside the kingdom of Egypt, they would have been identified as part of the Egyptian group of people. And in history, they would be identified as Egyptians, a subculture of Egypt. The part of the vocabulary we lose is we want everything separate and clean, but we don't realize that these people and the events were recorded by those who worked along beside them and those who opposed them. And the terminology varies from person to person. So I encourage people to comment on the videos now, and I leave all comments up, leave them all posted, because people have a right to be heard. I hope that people will at least watch 2 or 3 videos so they get really good comments. So I encourage people to comment on the videos now, and I leave all comments up, leave them all posted, because people have a right to be heard. I hope that people will at least watch 2 or 3 videos so they get really good comments.